Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers. This week on Words and Numbers, trees. Don't know why, you'll find out soon enough. The Smithsonian, Bureau of Labor Statistics, and God help me, voting. All this and more coming up on Words and Numbers.
Words and Numbers is a CiVL original podcast. Learn more at CiVL.com. That's CiVL.com.
So, Ant, dare I ask? This is where you say, dare.
Oh, you can ask.
All right. What's new and exciting in your world this week?
My new and exciting thing comes from the Journal of Forest and Ecology Management.
You've been a long-time subscriber, as I understand it.
They are, the article is talking about the growth of aspen trees in Yellowstone. It says, for the first time in over 80 years, aspens are growing tall and broad in the northern reaches of Yellowstone Park. And the point of the article is what the aspens have to thank for this is the introduction of wolves, or I should say the reintroduction of wolves. And what was happening is the elk, which are browsers, were eating the young, you get the tender leaves off of the young trees, and few of them were managing to grow tall. And so the wolves come along being reintroduced, who eat the elk, and now the elk are leaving the aspen alone, because there are fewer of them, and so you get more aspen. This is the point of the article, and this reminded me of an article that I'd read some years ago that goes a step further. And it must not have been aspen trees, it was some other kind of tree, but I believe it was in Yellowstone, where they said the reintroduction of the wolves were eating the elk were therefore not eating the trees were growing tall, and in so doing, altering the course of the rivers that are there. And all of that is, it's very interesting, I'm sure, to people who are into the ecology business. I find it very interesting as an economist, because it seems to me that while people are both very protective of environmental things and interactions and surprised at conclusions like this, that the wolves can affect the elk, which affects the trees, which affects the rivers, to an economist, this is all economics 101. And it's why we lose our minds every time someone says, well, we need a regulation to do X, or we should tax Y. It's like walking into Yellowstone and just saying, let's take away this particular species of something, and expecting there to be no reverberation.
Well, now, if I'm understanding you correctly, we have to get rid of the wolves and reintroduce the elk. I'm probably not understanding you correctly, but I will remind you that last week I talked about getting rid of all the mosquitoes in the entire world.
Yeah, and I got nervous in that conversation. We didn't pursue it, but yeah, that really bothered me. That what's going to happen?
I hate mosquitoes.
Well, what's going to happen is we're going to all of a sudden discover what unseen thing it was that we needed the mosquitoes for.
Right. James pressed the button, and then there were no mosquitoes, and ... the food chain collapsed. Right. And in fairness, it could work that way because it often works that way. Not always, but often.
It does, and I think Americans, people the world over, got a taste of that with COVID and the lockdowns. And at the time, economists were losing their minds, saying you can't shut down a third of the economy and expect life to go on, much less expect you to just be able to flip a switch and turn it back on again. And many of us, myself included at the time, said, look, you're introducing a problem that's going to reverberate for at least a decade.
Yeah, a decade.
And indeed,
maybe two.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And I will remind people, because it often comes up, we were very much against the lockdowns, and we were marginally in favor of putting on masks, but just to shut everybody up.
Right, yeah.
This was our perspective on COVID, and you and I each had it, And oh my God, we each had the first strain, and it was like death.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to be careful here. It's not to say we're not being COVID deniers, and it wasn't
No,
that we were
not at all.
claiming we should do nothing. It
No.
was just we were claiming that there were going to be huge ramifications that people aren't appreciating.
You try to shut down an economy, and sooner or later, you're going to shut down an economy.
Right.
Right. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to work through the steps of what's going to happen thereafter. And I would make the case that we still haven't really come back from it. But that dovetails nicely into something I wanted to talk about today, Ant. The jobs report has been revised.
Yes.
Do you keep an eye on this? Some
I
800
do actually.
Some 818,000 jobs have been removed from the jobs that had been added. 818,000. And it functionally, we're looking at what, April, May, June, I believe it is.
Yeah.
I think there's a month lag in the data. Right. Don't hold me to that, but I think it's a 1 month lag. And we need to add 180,000 jobs to keep up with, well, functionally birth rates, population.
Mm-hmm.
And we are well below that now for the last 3 months, each of the last 3 months. So we've got a problem. And, people like us have been saying, I don't know, man, something in this economy is going to have to give because we're not seeing something. And I think we've just seen something. And true to form, our commander-in-chief and big toe, Donald Trump, rather than saying, wow, that's alarming, let's convene some economists and think this through, fired the woman at the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Talk about shooting the messenger.
saying, and I quote, no one can be that wrong. I beg to differ, and I've got some examples, but we're going to let that part of it slide for now.
And I think James and I we were talking about this earlier, and I think you're right. We need to do an episode on this specifically. But it turns out that the 800,000, if indeed, and you're saying something that rings true with me, but I have to go back and check it. If indeed that's 800,000 for the quarter, that's roughly 200 plus 270,000, 250,000, something like that per month. That's on the high side of adjustments, but it's not out of, I shouldn't say out of the ordinary. It is a little bit out of the ordinary, but it's not unprecedented.
I believe it was the first time that the Delta was this big since 2008 or 2009, which kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah. The thing that bothers me a little bit more than that is the last time I did this comparison, which I believe was early 2024, I was comparing the initial jobs numbers to the revised jobs numbers and was surprised that there was a stretch of, I'm doing this off the top of my head, there was a stretch of, I believe, 11 months where the revision was in the same direction. It was down each time. In other words, they were consistently overestimating jobs on their first go-around, which you wouldn't expect, right? Because, of course, they're not going to get the number exactly right, but you expect it to be sometimes up, sometimes down.
Yeah, and you would expect it to average out right around a line.
Yeah.
And of course, their behavior is somehow, for some reason, the same as our friends over at the CiVL, which over or underestimate everything so regularly that we can predict it.
Right, yeah.
So maybe
we know by how much. We can tell you how to adjust.
Yeah, to get the right answer. Maybe we should start taking a look at the BLS. And I just want to point out that people who will fall in line with Donald Trump saying that it's some sort of cabal to make him look bad. All right, take a deep breath. Because all government data is revised. And you absolutely want it to be revised because the correct answer comes later in the day. You can get a pretty good estimate today of what happened last month. You're going to get a better estimate on it next month and a better estimate on it the month after that. And we see this, we talk about this most in crime data.
Yeah.
Right? The crime data, you have to wait like a year to get anything even approaching decent crime data. This became an issue for us when we wrote our book, Cooperation and Coercion, right? You can't get crime data from yesterday.
Yeah.
Everybody has to report it, and then it has to be vetted, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. People are used to being able to go to Google and ask Google how many jobs were created last month, and Google gives you an answer. When you're the people who are collecting the data, you can't do that. It doesn't exist. You have to actually go out and count these things. And that takes time. There's all kinds of human error involved in the reporting mechanism, and all that has to get straightened out. So it's not at all surprising that numbers get revised. What is surprising is when the revisions are particularly large. Again, this is not unprecedented, but it is large. And what's more disturbing to me is when the revision is always in the same direction.
Yeah, so we'll wait and see, as we always do, but we will get back to this. And I suspect we should do an entire episode on government numbers and revisions broadly.
Yeah, I think so. That would be a good episode.
So people can see how that works and how much it can drift in certain cases.
Mm-hmm.
It's really quite profound every now and again. Not often, but every now and again.
Get Words and Numbers on CiVL.com and on CiVL's TV and mobile apps. Regular episodes are free. Sign up for an annual membership to support our show and for access to member-exclusive content.
This, of course, Ant, brings us to the foolishness of the week. Do you have a prognostication?
Are you going to talk about the guy that paid his bill in pennies?
No, there's always a guy like that, and frankly, I'm a guy like that.
One of our listeners sent a candidate for foolishness of the week of some guy that got a $20,000 fine and paid it in pennies. And there's a picture of this huge pile of pennies. We should do the math and figure out, like, how long it would take you to count that, wrap it, how much it weighs. I mean, we're probably talking about literally tons of metal here.
To hell with that. We should go buy that guy a beer. He's my hero, for crying out loud. No, this week's winner, and it's a strange one, it's the Smithsonian Institution. Smithsonian Institute. Can you believe it? Can you believe this? The Smithsonian? You gotta be kidding me. Well, Trump is implicated, which should start to make things a little more understandable. Apparently, they had an exhibit about the presidents who have been impeached.
Oh, no.
They don't have that
there's
exhibit.
only two, right?
They don't have that exhibit anymore. They're gonna have it again in the future, the little sign says. And by in the future, they mean when Donald Trump's term is over. Now,
okay. So
now it's worse than it seems. It's worse than it seems. Because the exhibit now notes, what's left of the exhibit, that, quote, only 3 presidents have seriously faced impeachment, or have seriously faced removal, is the exact quote. Okay, so Andrew Johnson was impeached. He's got to be one.
Right.
Bill Clinton was impeached. He's got to be another.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what does that leave us with?
Well, there's only one president who's not only been impeached, but impeached twice.
You raise an interesting point. And I, for what it's worth, would throw Nixon on that heap. He would have been removed if he didn't resign.
He wasn't. He was never impeached.
No, but he would have been impeached and removed had he not resigned.
Yes.
And he knew it, which is why he resigned. So he seriously faced removal, I think, is a fair thing. So the Smithsonian is wrong. 4 have seriously faced removal, 1 twice. Or perhaps it's the case that they think Donald Trump was impeached but did not seriously face removal. But what it really is Donald Trump got on the phone and said, what the hell's wrong with you people? And they fired a person who was, one of the directors, and then they just took it all down and put it away.
See, but that doesn't make sense to me.
That's why it's the foolishness of the week.
But were I in his position, very few presidents have been impeached. He's the only one that's been impeached twice. And not only was he impeached twice, he survived both times. I mean, that's kind of like a mark of bring it on.
And got reelected. And
got reelected on top of it.
Were I him, I might brag about it.
Yeah, exactly.
It might be the winning bet for him. Most people couldn't get away with that. He probably could.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll leave that to fester until whatever happens
Now, I'm
happens.
not. Now, I just want to underline here because we're going to get hate mail from both sides. I'm not saying that he's done something that is worthy of bragging. I am saying if I were in his position, that had happened to me, I probably would brag about it.
I brag about it every day of the week. Come on. You're always, well, on the other hand. No, there's no other hand. We'd both be bragging about it. You tried to impeach me. You couldn't get it done. Then you tried again. You couldn't get it done. Up
And then
yours.
I got reelected.
Up yours. That's right. So anyway, speaking of elections, that actually is a very lovely segue into our main event for the week. Because a headline kind of caught my eye. It's one of those headlines that you could have missed, right? That I almost always do miss. But for some reason, my gaze trained right on it. And it turns out in their next election, the British are lowering their voting age to 16.
Oh, they are going to do it to 16.
Yes, to 16.
From, what is it now, 18? 18 should be.
You know, ours has been 18 since, what was it, 1971, the 26th Amendment, if memory serves. I think it was 71 when that passed.
When you mentioned this, I went and pulled up a map of voting age by country. I thought
It's
I'd
surprising,
get a
isn't it?
It is. 85% of the countries on the planet have 18 as voting age. 85% of them.
And a bunch do have 16.
There's a handful that has 16. I think a couple that have 17. 16 is as low as it goes. But then in the other direction, there are countries, a handful that go 19 all the way up to United Arab Emirates has 25.
Now that's interesting for reasons that we'll get back to later. But you and I once did an episode about the age of consent.
Yes.
Not just for sexual matters, well, you perverts out there, but for everything, right? So driving, voting, serving in the military, anything that requires a bright line distinction between yes and no. And we decided once upon a time that we were rather agnostic as to what the age should be, but there should be a singular age for all of it.
Right.
And that it was probably going to end up being driven by the military, wasn't it? Because that's the meat grinder that requires young bodies, young, strong bodies.
Yeah,
so there's going to be
the point where you're most in every way being an adult.
Yeah, that's right. And if there's this constant downward pressure on the part of one of the inputs, that's probably going to skew everything else. And I just want to think about it today. Let's start with voting, right? And we'll probably stick only with voting. Should we be letting people vote at 16? I know that our British friends have just decided yes. I can't imagine why.
Yeah, I don't know the particulars there, but here's what bothers me. It doesn't seem right that people should be able to vote on things like taxing me if they aren't of an age that they're actually contributing to the economic system and similarly being taxed by it. Now, you could say, well, 16-year-old, you can get a job and all that. Yeah, but we understand most 16-year-olds are living under the economic protection of their parents. They aren't
You've made a very
separate
entities.
entities.
Made a very dangerous argument here. Very dangerous argument, because that same argument can be shifted very subtly to say, if you suck out more taxes than you pay in, you shouldn't be allowed to vote.
I think there's a difference. I think there's a difference between us who are, let's say, roughly speaking, the same economically. And by that, what I mean is not that we earn the same amount of money, but rather we're both financially independent of parents. We're contributing in some way, whatever way that is. And it's part of the political process that we come together and we vote. And if we end up voting that I get taxed more and you get taxed less, or vice versa, that's the way it comes out. I don't think it's a good thing, but
well, that's the way
at least
it's always going to come out that way, because majority rules, and the majority gets more than they put in.
Yeah, that's something to talk about separately, the majority.
Yeah.
But at least in that instance, everyone who has had a say is on the same footing.
I disagree. I think they're on very unequal footing. And the majority who would stick it to the minority is very much incentivized to do that. And then the politicians they elect are very much incentivized to do that because we're dealing with large numbers. And that's how politicians get reelected. So we'll set that off to the side, I guess, as yet another disagreement that we found 2 weeks. We usually agree on most things. Our disagreements are usually disagreements of degree, not of kind. But we've had a couple of disagreements of kind. But I want to get back to this idea of letting 16-year-olds vote, because I think on the merits, it's stupid. Right? And let's just walk through it for very briefly. 16-year-olds don't really know all that much about the world, how it works, and what should happen next.
Words and Numbers is part of the CiVL network. CiVL is a streaming platform dedicated to upgrading civilization by exploring better ways for people to organize, innovate, and thrive. At CiVL, we believe that societies flourish when their members honor the civic equality of all people and engage with one another through cooperation. CiVL seeks great minds from around the world to share bold ideas for fostering healthy, dynamic societies. By creating space for honest disagreement among people who share a commitment to building a better future, CiVL offers a refreshing alternative to divisive punditry and insular echo chambers. Words and Numbers is freely available, but those who subscribe to CiVL will access exclusive content, including regular live streams and conversations with remarkable people who are working to build a better society. For more information and to subscribe, visit CiVL.com. That's CiVL.com. Use the code Words and Numbers, that's one word, for 50% off an annual subscription.
Okay, so let me pause for a second. You and I agree on the ends, which is 16-year-olds shouldn't be voting. We disagree on why.
Yeah.
The argument that you're now giving, I'm going to say, is extremely dangerous.
And you're right to say it. You're absolutely right to say it, because by my logic that I just laid out, we could probably have some sort of current events test before you walk into the voting booth.
Right.
And I'm kind of okay with that. I'm just saying, remember a couple of episodes ago when we talked about maybe how democracy is not the best answer to every question. Maybe there are other ways to do these sorts of things. But of all the people in our population, teenagers are dumbest, except for the elderly who have lost the control of their minds. And the elderly who have lost control of their minds tend not to vote.
Yeah.
Now, the elderly, the old people in America vote in droves, which is why they get very favorable legislation. Because every politician knows that if you start talking about Social Security, them old people are coming at you hard. And you won't be around next election cycle. All right, so 16-year-olds are, let's just use the word ignorant, right? That doesn't bring with it the stigma of stupid.
Let me drill down on this a little bit, because all of our young listeners' ears are perking up and they're starting to type hate mail.
No. Young listeners of this podcast agree with us on this. I can guarantee it.
Yet, I would say this is not, at least for myself, I would not be claiming that 16-year-olds are stupid or they can't think logically or any of that. That's not my argument. My argument would be that they lack experience, that there are subtleties that need to be weighed, and they do not have the experience to weigh those things well.
I think all of those things are true. I think they are ignorant, they are inexperienced, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But every single thing I can point to militates against allowing them to vote. I can't think of a single thing that would say yes, we should let this happen.
Oh, I can only think of one, which is that I'm a politician who appeals to young voters.
Yeah, but about that, I did some digging, and I'm only looking at federal elections, right? So there's not as many. I didn't drill down to look at House members or anything like that. And I frankly don't know if I could. But I couldn't find a single federal election that was swung by 18 to 21-year-old voters.
Really? Not even during Vietnam?
Uh-uh.
How
You got to remember, back then, elections weren't particularly close.
Right, I guess so, yeah.
And, you know, I could have pointed to one had Al Gore won Florida in Bush v. Gore.
Yeah.
Had Al Gore won Florida, we could have easily made the case that young people pushed him over the edge. Right? Because young people overwhelmingly vote Democratic. But here's the thing. Young people overwhelmingly don't vote at all. You're looking at like 30%. They vote like 30, 40% tops.
Really? I had no idea.
Which is well beneath what the average is. The average is about 55 or so, 55%, 60. So, all right. Now I'm really not getting it. And let me make it even worse for you. And we'll get back to the United Arab Emirates now. It is very clear that the human brain, the frontal cortex, doesn't really mature until the mid-20s. Now, it's going to be different for everybody, and the brain continues to develop for an entire lifetime. So there's not a day where you say, okay, your brain is fully developed. But the vast majority of your development happens up to the age of 25, give or take. Maybe the Emirates at age 25 have the exact right answer. Don't you want people whose logic and emotional capabilities are most fully developed?
Yeah, but then you've got the counter argument of what about all the people who are, let's say, 18 to 24 years old who are being affected by the laws that you're passing?
No, that's
Should
exactly
they not
right.
have a say?
That's exactly right. And this is why once upon a time you and I tried to find a universal age. Right? And if you run the universal age to 25, the military is not going to work anymore.
Right.
So you probably can't run it to 25, even though I think everybody at their most honest moment would say, well, that's the one that makes the most sense. Because, look, no matter what age we pick, it's going to be arbitrary. There will always be people underneath the line who are more well qualified than a lot of people who are above the line.
Right.
Right. And we've all met 14-year-olds thinking, wow, did you come out of the womb at 47? How did this happen? And we've met 47-year-olds who we know, if they got in real trouble, really belong in juvenile court. So, okay, there's no way to satisfy everything here, right? Something is always going to stick out like a sore thumb.
Words and Numbers is a CiVL original podcast. We work with CiVL to advance their mission of upgrading civilization by exploring ideas that promote civic equality and cooperation. We believe the most pressing issues humans face, war, poverty, debt, tribalism, arise from coercive institutions that bring out the worst in us. We at CiVL look to voluntary solutions to these and other problems. We invite you to explore CiVL's new platform at CiVL.com. That's CiVL.com.
Now, I want to revisit something that I had proposed some time ago, kind of just tongue-in-cheek, but every time we have a conversation like this, I come back to it, which is, why can't each individual choose for him or herself? So in other words, what I envision is a system of laws that treat each person as either an adult or a minor. And if you are treated as an adult and you break the law, the full weight of the law comes down on you. If you're a minor and you break the law, there's something like we do this, as now the juvenile system deals with you, and when you become an adult, your record is sealed or whatever it is. There's these various protections. You effectively get do-overs. But on the flip side, if you're a minor, you can't enter into contracts. You can't own a house. You can't, well, all sorts of things you can't do that you can do. Oh, and among them is vote, that you can do as an adult. And so in this system, I picture each individual being able to say, sign a legal document at some point. And it's a one-shot deal. You sign it, you're done. You say, I hereby profess that I am now an adult. And you might have some people declaring themselves adults at 15. Others maybe never.
You see the problem here. The problem with this is obvious, right? People can claim they're an adult and be no such thing. And they don't have the capacity to make that choice.
Ah, that's the problem now. Yeah. At what point are you old enough to decide that you're old enough to be an adult? Right.
That you're old enough. And that decision probably shouldn't rest with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I think we need a universal bright line standard. And I think every country realizes you need a universal bright line standard. And the Brits are going to 16. Okay, I guess. Now, it's worth mentioning that voting at the individual level doesn't matter at all. Your vote will literally never turn an election. It will literally never happen. And given that, it's a waste of your time to go vote. Mm-hmm. Now, voting is a performative act, and as such, it allows you to be a part of something larger than yourself and to participate in that thing. And on that note, it makes a lot of sense to vote, right? And so, adding all these young people in, probably not going to change any of the outcomes. But maybe, just maybe, it'll have young people buying in to whatever system the politicians want them to buy into. And you can think of that as a good thing, or as I do, a rather pernicious thing. But I get it, right? There's a point to be made on the other side of our argument with voting as a performative act.
If you don't have any more to add, I want to skip to the so what, because I have a bunch of things to say.
So what? I guess you've got things written down, so you might as well go ahead.
I do. See, I have cards. So here's the so what. I had a conversation with somebody recently that was related to this. I came away thinking, and it was about voting, and I came away thinking this person shouldn't be voting at all because the person didn't even understand, and this is an adult, didn't understand how our system worked. And the discussion was of the United States as a democracy versus a republic. And the person oddly said in one sentence, the United States is a democracy because we have representatives. No,
sweet Lord,
it's a republic because we have representatives.
Punkin, no, that is incorrect.
And just for those who are hazy on the details, in a democracy, correct me if I'm wrong, James, in a democracy, the voters vote directly for or against the laws.
Yeah,
in a republic,
whatever.
In a republic, they vote for representatives. The representatives then vote for or against the laws.
Yep, and the representatives are a mediating body. They look at the electorate and say, what is it that you want? What is it that would be best? What is it that I will be voting for? I mean, obviously, that's in an ideal set of circumstances.
And in light of all of that, I come back to your earlier statement that, look, there are some people who are voting, some adults voting who shouldn't be voting. To which I say, yeah, maybe we've tried this and it failed spectacularly.
I have an idea in my head, and I bet we have the same idea. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to start off with, what if we had a test?
Yes.
Basically, basic civics.
And we already have that test, and we give it to immigrants.
Right.
If an immigrant needs to pass a basic test to become a full citizen, then everybody should pass that basic test to become a full citizen. That doesn't mean you're a non-person. It just means you're going to have to take that test again next year if you can't pass it this year.
Right. If you don't,
it's not like you'd be rounded up and put in prison or sent to a labor colony. No, your life will go on as it always did. But if you think you're going to vote, pass the damn test.
Yeah, if you don't understand how the system, the political system works, you shouldn't be participating in it, because your voice can have an impact on others. I mean, it's the same reason why we say, look, you can't drive a car unless you pass the test, because your actions can have an effect on others. We're not saying you're not allowed to drive. We're just saying pass the test. Figure out how it works.
You must know how this goes before we let you do it. And
now, we can't.
In a self-governing republic, voting is important enough to put some restrictions on it. And, we always argue about whether you should have to present ID to vote. Of course you should have to present ID to vote. The easiest way to root out any fraud is to demand a legitimate ID before people walk in.
Right.
So anybody who makes the argument, oh, it's somehow wrong or misguided to require ID, that person is looking to pull the wool over your eyes. No question.
Yeah, particularly since you need ID to do just about anything else in life.
Anything. That's right. That's right.
Now, we tried, for nefarious purposes, shortly after the Civil War, a test. And of course, the ostensible purpose was, well, show that you understand civics. The actual purpose was to disenfranchise certain people.
I told you that I took that test, yes? I had a professor in graduate school.
I recall you saying something, yeah.
In graduate school, a room full of roughly 20 PhD candidates was given the test that was handed to black people in the wake of the Civil War. I think 3 of us passed.
Yeah, PhD students.
Well, keep in mind, too, that the person who handed us the test didn't tell us, fill this out as if it were 1880.
Yep.
So there were things that were different. I am proud to say I passed the test. I didn't pass it by as healthy a margin as I would have liked.
Mm-hmm.
But it was hard. We wouldn't ask immigrants the things that were on that test. It was difficult. And there were a host of different ones, right? So each locale could have its own test. They shared a nature, but they weren't all exactly the same.
But here we are in this situation where, on the one hand, we want people to have a say in their government. In the other hand, we don't want people voting who don't know what they're doing, because they're going to have an impact on the rest of us. And there is a solution to this. In fact, the founders knew very well what the solution was. And we have it in front of us, we just don't use it. And that is a constitutional republic.
Yeah.
That is, you
Imagine
let the masses do their voting in the republic way that we do it, but there are certain things that they may not do unless you get a supermajority of them.
No, I'd rather see us go back to the original format, actually, with take away the direct election of senators. That's proven to be a disaster.
Right, yeah, there's all kinds of... But at the very least, if the federal government were restricted to the things under the Constitution it's allowed to do, most of the debates that we have at a national level would disappear.
Yeah,
because
non-starters.
the government wouldn't be messing with this stuff.
Yep, absolute non-starters. I think I can climb aboard with everything you had written on your card. So I think we've done well with card. So what today. Yeah, it's a lovely, lovely card. 3x5. Anyway, I guess that's about it. I will remind everybody to be nice to one another. I know that's a tall order. But, look out the window. It's time. Set an example, for crying out loud. Be nice to each other. And seeing as how there are probably still a couple of people still here, I have a story. You want to hear a story? I think you might have heard this one before. And ever since I stopped doing smoking stories, I've got all these stories that need to come out, and I don't have a place to do it. So,
and I'll say, because you're not going to plug it, let me plug it for you. James has a YouTube channel with smoking stories. I don't know how many you have there.
Yeah,
but
I thought
pretty
they were entertaining.
Quite entertaining.
Yeah, pretty entertaining. But here's one that's going to piss everybody off, and rightfully so. Many of you know, but many more of you don't, that I made my living, prior to becoming an egghead, in mental institutions and group homes. And I was working at a group home in 1992. I was a young man at the time, and I was working in a group home filled with geriatric people. Should I mention the name of the institution for whom I worked? They're probably going to be angry if I do. So it was the Hartford Association of Retarded Citizens in Hartford, Connecticut. I'm sure they've changed the name by now, right? It includes that word that we're not supposed to use anymore, but that was the name of the place I worked. And in my group home with 6 geriatrics, only 2 of them were verbal. So we had 4 people who couldn't talk at all. And the second banana declared that, well, given that it's an election year, they need to vote. And I said, really? People who can't talk should vote. I mean, these people had severe limitations. You wouldn't let them cross the street on their own. You'd never let that happen. If you let one cross the street on your own, you would be arrested for neglect. That was literally true. And I thought, well, it's not like any of them can read. We'll probably just let this go and it won't be an issue. But no. This clown called the League of Women Voters, who came to the group home with their little stack of ballots, and they proceeded to put them in front of the people and wait for them to point or literally drool on a name on the ballot. And all those ballots counted.
Really?
Really. And because I was there, I know how they voted. Shockingly, 4 voted for Clinton and 2 for Perot. George Bush not picking up a lot of support from the group home.
League of Women
crowd.
Voters. You're right.
League of Women Voters leans left, I suspect. But being the smart ass I am, I let this pass. And as soon as it was over, I said, well, I now understand that you were right all along, that a constitutional right to vote, and we have to facilitate every constitutional right. So now I want to go out and buy them all handguns. And somehow, for some reason, that constitutional right was not nearly as important to the nice people in charge. So when you think your one vote makes a difference, you have to overcome all this nonsense. And trust me, this nonsense happens everywhere. Have a great weekend.
See you next week, James.